This is Audible.
From Audible, I'm Jenny Hoops. From the Washington Post Politics section, John Wagner writes, Trump pushes back on impeachment talk, citing his popularity among Republicans. President Trump sought Friday to push back against talk of impeaching him that has intensified since Democrats took back control of the House, arguing that his adversaries want to remove him from office because of his popularity and success. They only want to impeach me because they know they can't win in 2020. Too much success, Trump wrote in one of two tweets Friday morning that addressed the subject. House Democratic leaders have sought to tamp down immediate talk of impeachment, counseling that they should wait for special counsel Robert S. Mueller III to file a report on his investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential campaign. But as the new Congress convened on Thursday, several rank-and-file members were vocal about the prospect of removing Trump from office. One announced he was filing articles of impeachment, while another made headlines overnight by calling for Trump's removal in profane terms at a gathering hosted by a liberal group. How do you impeach a president who has won perhaps the greatest election of all time, done nothing wrong, no collusion with Russia, it was the Dems that colluded, had the most successful first 2 years of any president, and is the most popular Republican in party history, 93%, Trump wrote on Twitter. Under the Constitution, presidents can be impeached and removed from office for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. In a television interview that aired Thursday morning, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat California, said that the House's actions regarding impeachment should be guided by an anticipated report from Mueller, who is probing whether Trump's campaign coordinated with Russia and whether Trump has tried to obstruct the investigation. We have to wait and see what happens with the Mueller report, Pelosi said on NBC's Today Show. We shouldn't be impeaching for a political reason, and we shouldn't avoid impeachment for a political reason, so we'll just have to see how it comes. Under the Constitution, presidents can be removed from office for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Representative Brad Sherman, Democrat California, meanwhile, announced that he was introducing articles of impeachment against Trump, whom he accused of obstructing justice by firing former FBI Director James B. Comey in 2017, among other alleged misdeeds. And overnight, a video clip went viral of Representative Rashida Tlaib, Democrat Michigan, saying Democrats should impeach the mother bleep at an event hosted by the advocacy group MoveOn.org at a bar near the Capitol. Asked about those comments during an appearance Friday morning on Fox News' Fox and Friends, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders echoed some of the sentiments in Trump's tweets. Look, you're not going to impeach this president when he's had two of the most successful years that any president has had in modern history, Sanders said. The only reason they want to come after this president is because they know they can't beat him. They have no solutions for America. She added, I hope some of these new faces that campaigned on being different and being a change will actually come here to work with the president, work for solutions, and actually look to help the American people, not to help their own political careers. Trump's job approval among Republicans was 88% in December, according to Gallup polling. That's lower than that of President George W. Bush in December 2002, when he had a 92% approval rating among Republicans on average. Trump's overall approval rating among Americans averaged 39% in December, according to Gallup. That's lower than most other presidents at that time in their presidencies. It was unclear Friday how much restraint Democrats would show in talking about impeachment. Asked about Tlaib's comments during an appearance on CNN, Representative Cheri Bustos, Democrat Illinois, said, Well, passions are running high. Let's just leave it at that, okay? She then repeated Pelosi's line about the need to let the Mueller investigation play out. Then we'll take it from there, she said. Republicans, meanwhile, sought to turn the tables on Democrats, claiming they aren't interested in getting things done. Look at the brand new elected congressman and her language, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican California, said on Fox News, referring to Tlaib. Their whole focus here is to try and attack this president when we're trying to move America forward. In his tweets Friday morning, Trump also sought to play down the recent volatility of the financial markets. As I have stated many times, if the Democrats take over the House or Senate, there will be disruption to the financial markets, he said. We won the Senate, they won the House. Things will settle down. Ocasio-Cortez, booed for her Pelosi vote, fires back. Don't hate me 'cause you ain't me, by Lindsay Beaver in the Washington Post Politics section. I'm Jenny Hoops. Newly minted Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat New York, who has attracted endless amounts of attention after becoming the youngest woman ever elected to Congress, was jeered as she cast her vote for Nancy Pelosi as House Speaker on Thursday. Then the 29-year-old Congresswoman responded on social media, where she has become something of a star. Ocasio-Cortez quote-tweeted a video showing some GOP lawmakers booing her as she entered her vote. Pelosi, Democrat California, was elected in a 220-192 vote over House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican California. Over 200 members voted for Nancy Pelosi today, yet the GOP only booed one, me, Ocasio-Cortez wrote on Twitter. Don't hate me 'cause you ain't me, fellas, she added, along with an emoji of a woman flipping her hand. It was perhaps Ocasio-Cortez's most Ocasio-Cortez response ever, and it had been retweeted tens of thousands of times by Friday morning. Since her election to Congress, Ocasio-Cortez has gained widespread attention from conservatives and liberals alike. She has sparred with her conservative critics and fired back, too, after then-Senator Claire McCaskill, Democrat Missouri, called the incoming Congresswoman a bright and shiny new object. Hours before the start of the 116th Congress, a video went viral on social media showing Ocasio-Cortez dancing on a rooftop back when she was a student at Boston University. It was an apparent effort to smear Ocasio-Cortez, but seemed to have the opposite effect. The freshman Congresswoman hasn't mentioned the video on her extremely active Twitter feed, but on Thursday, before she was booed, she did share one clip of a somewhat different reception she received in Washington. This is Jenny Hoops reading from the Washington Post Politics section. House Democrats vote to reopen government and deny Trump wall money, defying veto threat. By Erica Werner, Damian Paletta, and Sung Min Kim. The newly Democratic-controlled House passed a package of bills late Thursday that would reopen the federal government without paying for President Trump's border wall, drawing a swift veto threat from the White House and leaving the partial shutdown no closer to getting resolved. But two Senate Republicans who are up for re-election in 2020 broke with Trump and party leaders on their shutdown strategy, saying it was time to end the impasse, even if Democrats won't give Trump the more than $5 billion in border funding he is demanding. The comments from Senators Cory Gardner, Colorado, and Susan Collins, Maine, the only Senate Republicans running for re-election in states Trump lost, pointed to cracks within the GOP that could grow as the shutdown nears the 2-week mark. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican Kentucky, reiterated Thursday that the Senate will only take up government spending legislation that Trump supports. McConnell's stance prompted angry attacks Thursday from new House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat California, and other Democrats, who insisted they were trying to give Republicans a way out of the standoff by passing two pieces of legislation. One, a package of 6 spending bills that were negotiated on a bipartisan basis in the Senate and would reopen nearly all the federal agencies that have been shuttered since December 22nd, and the second, a stopgap spending bill through February 8th, covering only the Department of Homeland Security. The 6-bill package passed the House 241 to 190 Thursday night, and the short-term Homeland Security spending bill passed 239 to 192. A handful of Republicans broke ranks on each measure to vote yes with the Democrats. The House strategy could allow Senate Republicans to pass legislation that would reopen most of the government while setting aside the debate over the border wall. But thus far, because of Trump's opposition, party leaders have refused. What we're asking the Republicans in the Senate to do is to take yes for an answer. We are sending them back exactly, word for word, what they have passed, Pelosi said. Why would they not do that? Is it because the president won't sign it? Did they not hear about the co-equal branch of government and that we, the Congress, send the president legislation and he can choose to sign or not? McConnell on Thursday restated the stance he has adopted since the Senate unanimously passed a short-term spending bill last month without additional wall funding, only to watch as Trump turned against it the very next morning amid a conservative backlash. I've made it clear on several occasions, and let me say it again. The Senate will not take up any proposal that does not have a real chance of passing this chamber and getting a presidential signature. Let's not waste the time, McConnell said. Let's not get off on the wrong foot, with House Democrats using their new platform to produce political statements rather than serious solutions. As the impasse dragged on, Senate Appropriations Committee Chairman Richard C. Shelby, Republican Alabama, said for the first time that the stalemate could continue for months and months. A funding lapse of that length would have compounding consequences for the government's ability to provide promised services and for the approximately 800,000 federal workers who are either furloughed at home or working without any guarantee of getting paid. Comments from the most politically vulnerable members of McConnell's caucus suggested discomfort with the majority leader's approach and a desire for a quick resolution to the shutdown. I think we should pass a continuing resolution to get the government back open. The Senate has done it last Congress. We should do it again today, Gardner said, as the 116th Congress got underway with pomp and ceremony on both sides of the Capitol. Even if the legislation doesn't have the border money Trump wants, Gardner said, we can pass legislation that has the appropriations number in it while we continue to get more, but we should continue to do our jobs and get the government open and let Democrats explain why they no longer support border security. Collins, a senior member of the Appropriations Committee, also indicated support for an element of the Democrats' approach. I'm not saying their whole plan is a valid plan, but I see no reason why the bills that are ready to go and on which we've achieved an agreement should be held hostage to this debate over border security, said Collins. Nevertheless, Trump showed no sign Thursday that he was going to budge. A veto threat issued by the White House against the House bills read, "The administration is committed to working with the Congress to reopen lapsed agencies, but cannot accept legislation that provides unnecessary funding for wasteful programs while ignoring the nation's urgent border security needs." Trump himself made an appearance in the White House briefing room where, flanked by members of the Union for Border Patrol agents, he said he has never had so much support as I have in the last week over my stance on border security and for, frankly, the wall or the barrier. Without a wall, you cannot have border security, Trump continued. It won't work. Top congressional leaders plan to meet with Trump at the White House Friday in a repeat of a meeting they had on Wednesday. But so far, there are no signs of a breakthrough or any movement. We're not doing a wall. Does anyone have any doubt that we're not doing a wall? Pelosi said Thursday. Vice President Pence, in an interview Thursday on Fox News, reinforced the administration's position. I think the president has made it very clear. No wall, no deal, Pence said. The shutdown has lasted 13 days without any signs of compromise or earnest negotiations, with Democrats largely unifying and a number of Republicans flummoxed over Trump's strategy. Many of the federal workers impacted will miss their first paycheck beginning next week. Multiple national parks and museums have closed, and the impact is expected to become even more severe in the coming weeks. The food stamp program that millions of Americans rely on may grind to a halt beginning in February, and the Internal Revenue Service will not be able to process refunds. Complicating matters for the White House, McConnell has distanced himself from the discussions since Trump turned on the spending bill passed by the Senate last month, which enraged some Republicans who had voted for the measure believing they had Trump's backing. Shelby's comments marked the first time a top political figure estimated the shutdown could drag into the spring, drawing alarm from federal workers and others. Hearing this from the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee is, quite candidly, a punch in the jaw of federal employees, said Tony Reardon, president of the National Treasury Employees Union, which represents about 150,000 federal employees. Their mental anguish and anxiety is bad enough. To hear this coming straight from congressional leaders does not instill a lot of hope. During the 2016 presidential campaign, Trump promised to erect a wall along the Mexico border and have Mexico pay for it. He said terrorists, drugs, and criminals were coming to the United States through Mexico and needed to be stopped. This pledge proved very popular with many of his supporters. Since taking over in 2017, Trump has continued to assert that a wall is needed, but has backed away from insisting that Mexico pay for it. He has instead said the money should come from U.S. taxpayers, an idea that has divided Republicans. But many Republicans, some reluctantly, have agreed to follow his lead during the current shutdown. Though some Senate Republicans broke with Trump and leadership Thursday, others cautioned about what would happen if he caved on his signature promise. If he gives in now, that's the end of 2019 in terms of him being an effective president, said Senator Lindsey O. Graham, Republican South Carolina, on Wednesday during an interview with Sean Hannity of Fox News. That's probably the end of his presidency. Donald Trump has made a promise to the American people. He's going to secure our border. The shutdown is affecting about a quarter of the portion of the federal government funded by Congress, since the Pentagon and major agencies, including the Department of Health and Human Services, have already been funded through September 30th by spending bills passed by Congress earlier in the year. Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security also are not affected. Restriction on transgender troops serving in military can stand for now, D.C. Federal Appeals Court rules, by Anne E. Marimo in the Washington Post National section. I'm Jenny Hoops. A federal appeals court in Washington sided with the Trump administration Friday, saying restrictions on transgender men and women serving in the military can stand. The decision lifted an injunction that had barred the government from limiting their service. The unsigned order from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit has no immediate impact because federal judges in 3 other cases have temporarily prevented the administration from implementing its policy. Even so, the 5-page ruling reversing a lower court decision was a blow to the civil rights and gay rights organizations challenging the policy nationwide. In reversing a lower court ruling, the appeals court wrote, "The district court made an erroneous finding that the administration's policy was the equivalent of a blanket ban on transgender service." The appeals court order came after oral argument last month before Judges Thomas B. Griffith, Robert Wilkins, and Stephen Williams. The appeals court cautioned that its order was not a final ruling on the merits of the challenge, but that judges must give deference to military leaders when it comes to policy decisions about standards for service. Shannon Minter, legal director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights, called the decision cursory and misinformed and said it rests on the utter fiction that this ban is not a ban. Every other court has immediately understood that when you say you can serve only if you serve in your birth sex, that is a ban. It is dangerous and irresponsible. President Trump initially announced a sweeping ban on transgender military service via Twitter in July 2017, citing what he viewed as the tremendous medical costs and disruption. The administration's order reversed President Barack Obama's policy of allowing transgender men and women to serve openly and receive funding for sex reassignment surgery. Attorneys for active duty service members went to court to block the policy shift, which could subject current transgender service members to discharge and deny them certain medical care. The court rulings were met with another policy revision this year from then-Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, who issued a plan to bar men and women from the military who identify with a gender different from their biological sex and who are seeking to undergo the medical transition process. The new plan makes exceptions, for instance, for about 900 transgender individuals who are already serving openly and for others who would serve in accordance with their biological sex. The order Friday said the lower court erred by not giving sufficient weight to the administration's effort to revise its policy in response to the initial court ruling. The appeals court specifically mentioned the creation of a panel of military and medical experts for input. The government took substantial steps to cure the procedural deficiencies the court identified, according to the order. Although the Mattis plan continues to bar many transgender persons from joining or serving in the military, the record indicates that the plan allows some transgender persons previously barred to join and serve. It was not immediately clear how the court's order would affect the administration's effort to get the Supreme Court to intervene to allow the government to have the policy take effect. The High Court has not yet acted on the administration's request. A Justice Department spokeswoman did not immediately comment on the court's order. I'm Jenny Hoops, reading from the Washington Post National section. Yes, there are online preschools, and early childhood experts say they stink, by Valerie Strauss. In February 2015, I wrote a post with this headline, "And now online preschools, really?" Given that medical experts warn against too much screen time for young children, and given that early childhood experts say the best way for young children to learn is through structured play, it may have seemed that online preschools didn't have much of a future. Guess again. As early childhood education has increasingly become focused on what is called rigor, or an academic focus, which means that kids spend a lot of time in chairs, online preschools have gained a foothold. In 2015, Utah sponsored the first state-funded online preschool of its kind, called Upstart, and the company has expanded pilot programs to at least 7 other states, according to the nonprofit Defending the Early Years, which commissions research about early childhood education and advocates for sane policies for young children. Here's how the Hechinger Report, an independent nonprofit that reports education news, described some of them in this October 2018 post. Some online preschool programs boast award-winning curriculum and offer money-back satisfaction guarantees. Others offer subjects like science and art and virtual field trips to animated farms. One kindergarten readiness program offers children the promise of academic growth in as little as 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week. It receives funding from the state of Utah to provide online learning to rural children and has launched pilot programs in several states across the country, including Mississippi. Online preschool programs have been growing in recent years, and thousands of parents have signed their children up. The programs offer everything from educational games to a full preschool curriculum, complete with boxes of activities that are shipped to a student's home and a teacher's guide for an adult. Most online programs are offered by for-profit companies, although perhaps the fastest growing is Upstart, which was developed by the nonprofit Waterford Institute and is advertised as a kindergarten readiness program. That program has been used by children in Idaho, Indiana, South Carolina, rural Ohio, and Philadelphia, and is used by 30% of Utah's 4-year-olds. In 2013, the Waterford Institute received an $11.5 million federal grant to expand the program to rural children in Utah. This past October, more than 100 early childhood experts and organizations signed a statement calling for an end to public funding of online preschools. The statement, co-authored by Defending the Early Years and the Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood, said these preschools deny children the hands-on experience that research says is important for young children. It said in part, "Virtual preschool may save states money, but it's at the expense of children and families. Early learning is not a product. It is a process of social and relational interactions that are fundamental to children's later development. Asserting that this process can take place online without human contact falsely implies that the needs of children and families can be met with inexpensive, screen-based alternatives. All children deserve high-quality early education, and we call on local, state, and federal agencies and policymakers to reject online preschools and invest in fully funded, relationship-based, universal pre-kindergarten programs with proven long-term benefits. Here's a post by early childhood expert Nancy Carlson Page about the real problems with online preschool. Carlson Page is Professor Emerita at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where she prepared teachers for more than 30 years and was a founder of the university's Center for Peaceable Schools. She is also the author of Taking Back Childhood and Young Children in the Digital Age, A Parent's Guide, as well as a founding member of Defending the Early Years. The mother of actor Matt Damon and artist Kyle Damon, she is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Legacy Award from the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps for work over several decades on behalf of children and families. This first appeared on the EdSurge website, and I was given permission to republish it. By Nancy Carlson Page. The recent growth of online preschools, already in existence in at least 8 states, gives states an inexpensive way to deliver pre-K education. But it is a sorry substitute for the whole child, play-based early childhood education that all young children deserve to have. Cyber schools have been increasing over the last 20 years, and most programs are marketed by for-profit companies. The more recent emergence of online preschool programs opens the door for cyber education businesses to cash in on the estimated $70 billion per year pre-K market. In an education reform climate that has redefined education as academic standards and success on tests, online pre-K programs are an easy sell. Parents are ready to buy into computer-based programs that will get their kids ready for kindergarten by drilling them on letters and numbers. The programs teach discrete, narrow skills through repetition and rote learning. The truth is that for children to master the print system or concepts of number, they have to go through complex developmental progressions that build these concepts over time through activity and play. Young children don't learn optimally from screen-based instruction. Kids learn through activity. They use their bodies, minds, and all of their senses to learn. They learn concepts through hands-on experiences with materials in 3-dimensional space. Through their own activity and play, and their interactions with peers and teachers, children build their ideas gradually over time. Many of the online pre-K programs encourage parents to put their kids in front of computers to do academic drills, even if they are in a preschool setting. But if parents really want to help their kids get ahead, whether they are in brick-and-mortar preschools or not, they would do best by reading lots of books to their children, having ongoing conversations with them, listening and asking open-ended questions that help kids think. They might tell them stories, provide a place for children to play and materials to play with, such as building blocks and art materials that allow them to explore number relationships and use symbols. Cyber schools have grown most rapidly in poor, urban, and rural districts. Virtual schools have abysmally low test scores and graduation rates, but the companies that market them earn staggering profits gleaned from taxpayer dollars. As states begin to put money into preschool education, virtual schools can easily become the option of choice, allowing states to save money and claim they are offering pre-K education, albeit a substandard one, while allowing for-profit companies to extend their reach to an even younger age group. Online pre-K will widen achievement gaps and increase inequality. Kids who get a screen-based pre-K experience will be at a disadvantage compared to their counterparts in wealthier communities who thrive in rich, activity-centered programs that support their cognitive, social, emotional, and physical development. Programs such as Reggio Emilia, Waldorf, and other quality, play-based preschool programs. Recently, more than 100 early childhood leaders and organizations signed a position statement objecting to online preschools. In it, they quoted an American Academy of Pediatrics article stating that higher-order thinking skills and executive functions such as self-regulation and flexible thinking are best taught through unstructured and social, not digital, play. Preschool education is not learning letters and numbers on a computer screen. Children who are given this pseudo-preschool experience will not have the skills or knowledge of their peers who attend quality pre-K programs. The opportunity gap will widen at an even earlier age. States have a responsibility to provide high-quality early childhood education to every child. Research shows it's important for success in school and in life. Promoting an online version of pre-K to families misleads them into thinking they are helping their kids and undermines our larger societal goals of equal educational opportunity for all children. From Audible, I'm Jenny Hoops. From the Washington Post National section, Aaron Gregg writes, U.S. military food supplier for Iraq, Afghanistan is suspended over fraud indictment. The company responsible for providing food and water for deployed U.S. troops in Iraq and Afghanistan has been formally suspended after its former chief executive was charged with fraud in relation to an $8 billion troop supply contract, a U.S. official confirmed Thursday. Defense Logistics Agency spokesman Patrick Mackin said in a phone interview that the company, a Dubai-based conglomerate called Anem FZ Co., is barred from applying for future opportunities with the U.S. government. An Anem spokesman noted that the suspension does not affect the company's current ability to service its existing contracts in Iraq and Afghanistan, and noted that the company would seek an unspecified resolution with the Defense Logistics Agency. The suspension can still be overturned. We are disappointed by this action, which is based on years-old alleged conduct by individuals who no longer work for Anem or any of its subcontractors, the spokesman said. As we said when these individuals were charged by the Justice Department, we are puzzled why the department decided to pursue criminal prosecution for matters that are usually handled through civil resolution, but we understand that all of the individuals involved are vigorously contesting the charges against them. In late November, the Justice Department charged former Anem chief executive Abul Huda Faruqi and two of his associates with fraud, alleging they had laundered money, violated U.S. sanctions while shipping products through Iran, and constructed a fake construction scene to overstate their progress while bidding on lucrative government work. The indictment followed a lengthy investigation by the Department of Homeland Security and the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. The three individuals pleaded not guilty. For years, Anem has held multi-billion-dollar contracts to supply U.S. troops with food and water across 5 Middle Eastern countries. Its contract for Iraq, Kuwait, Syria, and Jordan was awarded to a different company in 2015, but Anem was able to extend that work by protesting the award. The Defense Logistics Agency is also moving to reopen the $8 billion Afghanistan troop supply contract to new competitive bidders. Anem's suspension is likely to speed up the process of transferring that work to a new set of suppliers. Chinese censors go old school to clamp down on Twitter. A Knock on the Door by Jerry Shi in the Washington Post World section. I'm Jenny Hoops. Hong Kong. The 50-year-old software engineer was tapping away at his computer in November when state security officials filed into his office on mainland China. They had an unusual and non-negotiable request. Delete these tweets, they said. The agents handed over a printout of 60 posts the engineer had fired off to his 48,000 followers. The topics ranged from U.S.-China trade relations to the plight of underground Christians in his coastal province in southeast China. When the engineer didn't comply after 24 hours, he discovered that someone had hacked into his Twitter account @Husoge and deleted its entire history of 11,000 tweets. "If the authorities hack you, what can you do?" said the engineer, who spoke on the condition of anonymity for fear of landing in deeper trouble with authorities. "I felt completely drained." In Beijing and other cities across China, prominent Twitter users confirmed in interviews to the Washington Post that authorities are sharply escalating Twitter crackdown. It suggests a wave of new and more aggressive tactics by state censors and cyber watchers trying to control the internet. Twitter is banned in China, as are other non-Chinese sites such as Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. But they are accessed by workarounds such as a virtual private network, or VPN, software that bypasses state-imposed firewalls. While Chinese authorities block almost all foreign social media sites, they rarely have taken direct action against citizens who use them, preferring instead to quietly monitor what the Chinese are saying. But recently, internet monitors and activists have tallied at least 40 cases of Chinese authorities pressuring users to delete tweets through a decidedly low-tech method, showing up at their doorsteps. Even for a country accustomed to censorship, a crackdown on Twitter is surprising because the service, like Google and Facebook, is used by a relatively small number of people, at least by Chinese standards. An estimated 10 million Chinese use Twitter, according to some tech industry watchers. Twitter does not issue statistics on China. That's still a minuscule figure compared with those on government-approved messaging and app sites. 1 billion for WeChat and hundreds of millions on Weibo, according to state figures. But in the past 2 years, as the space for political speech has all but vanished in President Xi Jinping's China, Twitter has played an increased role. It has become a cyber window to the outside world, a release valve for the disaffected, a virtual tea house for politically minded Chinese at home and abroad. Bankrupt mom-and-pop investors fume about the lack of financial regulations. Disgruntled farmers pass around videos of land seizures or police thuggery. Muslims from China's far west share pictures of loved ones locked away in state-operated re-education centers. It has begun to resemble the freewheeling Twitterscape in other tightly controlled nations such as Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And to the Chinese Communist Party, that means it is a rising threat. Twitter is the fastest, simplest, most important gathering place if you care about Chinese politics. It's extremely hot right now, said Ho Pin, the New York-based publisher of the Mirror Media Group, a leading purveyor of sensitive Chinese political news. In late November, the wife of renowned photographer Lu Guang took to Twitter to seek help for her missing husband, believed to be detained by police. His name is censored on the Weibo service. Last summer, when the Chinese government tried to break up a nationwide labor movement, tech-savvy student supporters informed the world via Twitter. An elite class of business people with ties to the upper echelons of the Communist Party, as well as media professionals, are increasingly sneaking peeks at the banned service, according to Ho. They all read it, he said. For the government, the threat exceeds that of anything else. Twitter has become their biggest target to take down. That's precisely what's happening now. He Jianbing, a financial commentator, said police came to his Beijing living room to warn about his tweets. Days earlier, officials visited the Guangzhou home of Ye Du, a well-known writer and supporter of the late Nobel Peace Prize laureate Liu Xiaobo, to hand him a printout of 802 tweets he needed to delete, Ye said in an interview. Meanwhile, all 30,000 tweets from the account of Wu Gan, an activist serving an 8-year prison sentence, were deleted in November, which suggested a government hack, said Yashui Cao, a Washington-based activist. Cui Haoxin, a Muslim poet, was taken to a police station and interrogated last week, partly because of his tweets calling attention to Islamophobia in China. They not only violated my personal freedom of speech, but they're effectively violating a foreign company and a foreign country's internet sovereignty, Cui said. Interest among Chinese users skyrocketed in early 2017 after the fugitive billionaire Guo Wenwei began using Twitter and YouTube to air sensational and largely unsubstantiated allegations of corruption against Chinese leaders. The campaign would have been unthinkable on Chinese social media, but it played out dramatically over several months on Twitter, drawing in a new generation of Chinese users. For months, Guo and his supporters shared corporate records and satellite images of California mansions allegedly linked to senior Communist Party officials. We tend to see cycles of tightening and relaxing, and China is clearly in a tightening phase currently as the economy slows down and domestic and intentional challenges loom large, said Dali Yang, an expert on Chinese politics. The Ministry of Public Security and the Cyberspace Administration of China, the Internet regulator, did not respond to requests for comment. The first time Chinese state security actively sought out Twitter users was in 2011, when Chinese dissidents, inspired by the wave of uprisings in the Arab world, tried to use the platform to mobilize protests, said Yaqiu Wang, a China researcher at Human Rights Watch. After that movement fizzled, Chinese authorities have kept an eye on the platform, but until recently, rarely intervened. That helped cultivate Twitter's reputation as a safe space for an improbable and colorful cast of Chinese voices. The veteran journalist Gao Yu, for one, tweets prodigiously despite living under house arrest after being charged with leaking state secrets in 2015. Bao Tong, a purged 86-year-old Communist Party official and former top aide to Chinese leader Zhao Ziyang, set up an account last year and hurls daily criticism of the Xi administration to 137,000 followers. Calls by foreign journalists to Bao's home are frequently cut off, but his access to Twitter appears to be rarely interrupted. He, the Beijing-based columnist, said there are fears that a full-scale crackdown on Twitter would choke off the last online venue in China for open intellectual debate. Last year, He wrote pointed comments on Weibo and WeChat, urging the Chinese central bank to lower reserve requirements for lenders because, in his estimation, the Chinese economy was struggling. "I never touched politics. I'm not a dissident and I'm not a celebrity," he said. "They still took away my voice." When police visited him last month to warn him about tweeting, He did not promise to stop. He's not sure he could. "We go to Twitter because we have no choice," He said. "For people like us, if you have to hold in your thoughts, it feels like dying." This is Jenny Hoops reading from the Washington Post World section. Pope Francis acknowledges sexual abuse scandals have damaged the Catholic Church, by Chico Harlan. Rome. In a letter to U.S. bishops released Thursday by the Vatican, Pope Francis directly acknowledged the damage done to the Catholic Church by sexual abuse scandals and provided a lengthy explanation of his proposed response, one focused on discernment, unity, and a change in our mindset. The Church's credibility has been seriously undercut and diminished by these sins and crimes, but even more by the efforts made to deny or conceal them, Francis wrote. This has led to a growing sense of uncertainty, distrust, and vulnerability among the faithful. The 3,600-word letter was largely prescriptive and spiritually oriented. It did not call for new measures to punish high-ranking clerics or hold them accountable, steps recommended by victim advocacy groups. Instead, Francis made a case that the problem required more than stern decrees or improving flowcharts, as if we were in charge of a Department of Human Resources. He also referenced divisions within the U.S. ranks. "Let us try to break the vicious circle of recrimination, undercutting, and discrediting by avoiding gossip and slander in the pursuit of a path of prayerful and contrite acceptance of our limitations and sins," Francis wrote. Francis's letter came as the U.S. bishops were gathering for a week-long retreat focused on prayer and spiritual reflection at a seminary outside Chicago. That retreat, which is closed to the media, was suggested by Francis after he met in September with several U.S. Catholic leaders. For some Vatican watchers, the letter provided signals about how Francis is trying to guide the Church through the most turbulent period of his papacy, while dealing with fractures, in the United States and beyond, over the reasons for the clerical abuse scourge. Francis has repeatedly connected the issue to abuses of power and clerics who have lost sight of their mission. But some church traditionalists say he has overlooked a problem of homosexuality in the priesthood. Tensions have grown between Rome and the U.S. Church after a year of abuse-related scandals. When the Pope was accused by a former diplomat of knowing about some of the alleged abuses of former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, a handful of U.S. higher-ups said the accusations were credible. Subsequently, Francis did not greenlight an investigation into McCarrick requested by the head of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Houston's Cardinal Daniel DiNardo. And the Vatican intervened to halt the U.S. bishops at their annual meeting in November from voting on new measures for handling abuse-related complaints. Next month, bishops from around the world will meet in Rome for a summit on sexual abuse and the protection of minors. Francis, in his letter, did not mention that gathering, but called for a collegial and paternal response, rather than one in which some emerge as winners and others not. The Pope urged the church leaders to acknowledge our hurt before the present situation and let ourselves together be summoned anew by God's word. Look, I can understand the Catholics who might scoff and say, we don't need more discernment, we need action, said John Gehring, the Catholic program director at Faith in Public Life, an advocacy group in Washington. I think what the Pope is saying is we need the deep discernment and the change of heart before we get to the policy. Scandals in multiple countries over the past year have highlighted the Church's struggle to deal with both abusive clerics and higher-ups who failed to stop them. In the United States, in addition to McCarrick's resignation, a blistering Pennsylvania grand jury report released in August detailed the behavior of 300 predator priests over 7 decades. Dozens of dioceses have since followed in publicly identifying abusive priests. Trump's Syria withdrawal snatches defeat from the jaws of victory, by David Ignatius in the Washington Post op-ed section. I'm Jenny Hoops. Asked to describe U.S. policy towards Syria after President Trump's sudden decision on December 19th to withdraw U.S. troops from that country, several key officials use the same 2 words: total chaos. There's another phrase that comes to mind in assessing Trump's move: snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. U.S.-backed forces were on the verge of eliminating the Islamic State in northeastern Syria when Trump made his surprise announcement, which went against the recommendation of all his senior diplomatic and military advisors. Trump did it anyway, for reasons that remain mysterious to some of his subordinates. The trigger was a December 14th phone call from President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey. Trump had been briefed to warn the Turkish leader not to invade Syria, as he had been threatening to do. But Trump instead told Erdogan, "You know what? It's yours. I'm leaving." Trump's idea was to let Turkish forces take over the U.S.-backed campaign against the Islamic State in northeastern Syria. But senior military officials say the Turkish alternative doesn't add up, quite literally, in terms of numbers. The Turks want to replace a Kurdish-led force of about 60,000 fighters, known as the Syrian Democratic Forces. They have also claimed to U.S. officials that they have 50,000 Syrian opposition forces under their control, but that is wildly overstated. The Turkish-backed opposition is closer to 5,000, U.S. officials say, and many have extremist connections. The Turks have been trying to sell the notion that they can combat the Islamic State for more than 2 years. U.S. military commanders who investigated Ankara's proposals starting in 2016 began describing the force that would supposedly clear Raqqa and other extremist strongholds as a ghost brigade. The posturing continues. Last week, Turkish-backed Syrians moved heavy weapons across the border toward Manbij to signal their readiness. But Turkish military resources are so threadbare that they've asked the United States to provide overhead surveillance, logistical support, and air cover for any operation to finish off the Islamic State in the middle Euphrates River Valley, officials say. The United States has so far refused such requests. The most dangerous consequence of Trump's Turkish solution is that it could reignite the Islamic State. The problem begins with about 780 foreign fighters who are now being held by the SDF in a half-dozen prisons in northeastern Syria. The SDF commander, General Mazloum Abdi, told me bluntly in an interview last month that he wouldn't be able to hold the prisoners if Turkish forces invaded the areas under his control. These Islamic extremist prisoners are considered the worst of the worst, and their release could mean mayhem. But so far, almost none of the 48 countries from which the fighters traveled to Syria has been willing to take them back. Britain, France, Belgium, and other European nations that have previously been attacked are said to have refused, either claiming they don't have legal authority or making other excuses. Macedonia has agreed to take a handful, as has Lebanon. Several North African nations are considering repatriation requests, and a Central Asian country might eventually take as many as 100. Trump's apparent assumption initially that Turkey would take the prisoners could be almost as dangerous as letting them go free. The Turks have allowed extremist fighters to crisscross their border since the Syrian civil war began in 2011, U.S. officials say. These officials argue that Erdogan's real nemesis in Syria is the Kurdish militia, which he calls a terrorist organization rather than the extremists. Erdogan has many links with the Trump team. Michael Flynn was a well-paid but unregistered Turkish lobbyist before he briefly became Trump's national security advisor. Rudolph W. Giuliani, Trump's personal lawyer, tried in 2017 to broker a deal to free Reza Zareb, a Turkish-Iranian businessman with links to Erdogan's family. Trump himself has embraced Erdogan as a kindred spirit when they've met at summits. Amid all this policy turmoil, the Kurds just keep fighting the Islamic State. A U.S. official told me Thursday that the SDF had suffered 80 casualties, including 25 dead, in heavy fighting by its 5,000 fighters over the previous 72 hours. It had also pushed to within 15 miles of the Iraqi border. A brief ray of hope for the Kurds is that Trump has agreed to carry out the withdrawal of U.S. Special Operations Forces from Syria over the next 4 months, and Turkey has pledged that it won't attack until the SDF's American advisors leave. The Kurdish fighters do what they promised to do, said one U.S. official who has worked closely with them. The same, alas, cannot be said of the Trump administration. I'm Jenny Hoops, reading from the Washington Post op-ed section. If we're going to waste billions on a wall, let those billions be Trump's, by Catherine Rampell. President Trump wants a wall. Democratic lawmakers don't want to pay for it. Here's an elegant compromise. If Trump truly thinks building a wall is such a brilliant idea, he should pay for it himself. I'm actually not the first to propose this. Last week, Representative Walter B. Jones, Republican North Carolina, suggested that our builder-in-chief pledge some of his own funds toward the wall, though Jones emphasized that a fiscally responsible approach would primarily rely on offsetting cuts to wasteful federal spending. Now, saying you're going to pay for a border wall by eliminating wasteful federal spending is a bit of an oxymoron. The wall, after all, is a non-solution to a non-crisis. Or, as Trump budget director and acting chief of staff Mick Mulvaney put it in a recently resurfaced 2015 interview, wall as immigration policy is absurd and almost childish. In recent years, we've had a net outflow of undocumented immigrants, with the total estimated population shrinking to a decade low in 2017. Even if you thought that dwindling number of undocumented immigrants was still a problem, Note that most immigrants joining the undocumented population don't cross the border illegally. They come in legally and overstay their visas. Which means a wall is unlikely to do much unless it's tall enough to stop airplanes. There's also the physical and legal impracticality of building a 2,000-mile wall along the southern border, where rough terrain makes construction challenging. And in Texas, most border land is privately owned, so the federal government would have to kick private citizens off their own property. There are also more effective border security technologies, such as drones, that Trump dismissed at a Wednesday cabinet meeting as mere bells and whistles. All of which is to say that spending money on a magical border wall is not a good use of billions of dollars. But if we're going to waste billions of dollars, at least let those billions be Trump's. It would be his money on the line only initially, of course. Trump has repeatedly promised that Mexico will pay us back for the costs of construction. Occasionally, he insists that Mexico has already committed this money somehow through his willfully confused understanding of how the still as yet unratified NAFTA 2.0 will work. If he genuinely believes the Mexican check is in the mail, he shouldn't object to bearing the risk while we wait for it. In the meantime, Trump can afford to float the funds himself, at least if he's really worth as much as he claims. Plenty of shallower-pocketed Trump supporters have already pitched in with their own contributions through a GoFundMe effort to pay for the wall, which has now raised nearly $19 million. And heaven knows he's been bleeding taxpayers for plenty more money between Secret Service hotel bills at Mar-a-Lago and above-market rate rent for the military at Trump Tower. Like those GoFundMe donors, Trump could model putting America first by donating all that money back, plus anything he has collected from the political fundraisers and dubious international business coming through his hotels. Trump pledged to donate the Trump Organization's profits from foreign government patronage to the U.S. Treasury, but the amount of this voluntary donation last year, about $150,000, was both non-transparent and almost certainly lowballed, given that we know the Saudi government alone spent about $270,000 at his D.C. hotel over just the several months around his inauguration. Trump could probably claim a charitable deduction for the cost of the wall, even if he paid for it directly rather than giving funds to Treasury first. This would be aggressive, but still less ridiculous than some other tax maneuvers he has claimed. And even if he chooses not to categorize the construction project as charitable, sometimes he claims closing the border is a profit-making operation, after all. Perhaps he'll see this as a great branding opportunity. He could plaster his name across 2,000 miles of borderland, maybe even make it visible from space. After he's out of office, if the government has eminent domained all that private Texas property to Trump personally, perhaps he could turn the area into a massive Trump theme park, complete with bumper cars and baby cages. But the best possible outcome might be this. If Trump believes that he, rather than the tax-paying public, is on the hook for construction costs, he might just declare the thing already built. He can instruct Fox News to air some B-roll of the Great Wall of China and hope his supporters don't notice the difference, and we can all, at long last, move on to the next fake crisis.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.